welcome to the Technology for Product Managers webinar. We're AKF partners. About half of you probably know us well. Some of you that don't, we're a boutique consulting firm based primarily in the US, but we do operate worldwide. And we're a bunch of seasoned folks that are ex-operators in Silicon Valley companies, and now we consult and help small startups and larger and older software companies, e-commerce companies, and anyone trying to improve in digital. So this is our free webinar. It's an introductory set of content for a class we'll be teaching in February. So we're glad you're able to attend, and hope that you enjoy the content. So we'll start with technology waves by decade, and we'll have a poll after this for you to weigh in on your experience. But for most of you, this will be familiar. For some of you that are a bit on the younger side, some of this stuff may be ancient history, but it's still foundational. And if you're in an older company, you'll recognize a lot of these terms and may wonder where they came about. So we're going to go back to the 70s. We could go back even further, but we're going back to the decade that I was born, and that's why I decided to pick this since I created the presentation. And these are just some of the key trends that have happened, particularly from an aspect of product management, particularly software product management. And that's where we're starting at this point in time. And again, these are not all the key trends, but just some major waves that have really influenced how we do technology, particularly digital technology. So starting with mainframes, from the compute perspective, these really started with accounting and line of business systems. And it was accounting because it was numbers, they were easier to manage, it was easy to tie out, it was fairly straightforward how we could start automating some of these processes. This also led to big IT consulting firms, because a lot of them were accounting firms that really needed to automate the services they provide. So a lot of consulting started, technology consulting started at that time, working primarily with mainframe technologies. And this had typically a green screen. You didn't have to worry too much about a real dynamic user interface, and it was really fixed, and one developer could manage the entire user experience and a lot of the business logic. As we moved into the 80s, we started to see optimization and split out. So getting closer to the end customer, we had PCs. This was when Microsoft took off. You had document authoring really took off. It started before then with spreadsheets such as VisiCalc and word processing documents, but it enabled individuals to be productive, not just entire departments. So it was really personal productivity, usually within a company, but sometimes individuals, sometimes within academia. And then we also started to see more departmental servers. It wasn't just mainframes. You started to see Unix as a new operating system. We started to see competitors in relational databases such as IBM, started with DB2, but this is when Oracle took off, and names like Informix and Sybase and any of those other flavors that you might remember. This is when relational databases took off, and you started to see bigger packaged applications. SAP really took off at this time, and competitors, Oracle, sat on top of theirs. So we had so many different databases now. We started entering into the early 90s and late 80s with business intelligence, meaning we needed to aggregate a lot of data across a lot of different systems. And again, this was typically highly structured data. But in order to answer questions about your business, you had different systems, different parts of the business that needed to now have data integrated in order to pull out some information. And then the 90s really took off. We had laptops, email, and calendaring. I don't know how many of you remember the time you first got email and calendaring, and how much easier that made your life after voicemail. For those of you that may recall voicemail, that was your primarily mail tool. For some of us that were old enough, we would have 50 voicemails that we would have to check. You would do it once a day, and email looked so promising. And now I know I spend more time in email than I did in voicemail back then. More proliferation of departmental apps. CRM really started taking off then, and CRM at this time in the 90s was primarily around acquiring customers. It was managing your sales force, and sales folks love to be told what to do. So it was difficult to get salespeople to use these tools. We weren't quite entering CRM as relationship management from the customer support, retain these customers. That didn't really take off until the next decade. And so moving into 2000s, this is when e-commerce really took off. Even though most of us remember the web was in the mid 90s, it really blew up then. And so we were able to now really track sales all the way through the process. We started getting a 360-degree view of the customer. And this is really where CRM was from both ends of the spectrum, from acquiring the customer all the way through to keeping that customer and making sure we don't lose them. We also needed 24 by 7 by 365 systems. Until that point, a lot of our systems were designed to take outages, do major upgrades once a week for several hours. When you're e-commerce and 24 by 7, that's a brand new capability that's needed. And so we had to completely re-architect a lot of our systems. Any older systems built on older technology really just were not designed to take systems down. Then we got into search and marketing. How do we drive people to our site? How do we drive people to our physical stores? Search was a relatively new technology at this time where people were looking for products and goods, and it entered its own market. It was one thing just to be able to index the web, but it was also another one to determine if you want to buy and advertise. That's where people are looking for you. You started getting advertising algorithms and bidding algorithms. So all of these new capabilities were needed within the business just from the launch of this. And then social media started taking off. Early on, it was the MySpaces, but Facebook started taking off at that time. And so again, more and more technologies that we as product managers and technologists needed to manage either in our environment or build new experiences. In the 2010s, this is when mobile took off. June 29th, 2007. I remember that date, not because it was my birthday, but that's when the iPhone first launched. That's what really changed the world. Some of us had Palm Pilots before that. Some of us stuck with Blackberries for a while. But with the mobile device, this is what really required us to focus on user experience. It was one thing to get a decent user experience on a desktop, but with mobile, the form factor completely changed. The user flow completely changed. We also started to get more and more information from the users themselves and from the end customers. We could see where they were. We could track where they were. We could also pick up information from other applications they were using. We were able to actually start surveilling and recording what our customers were doing at this point. And then in parallel with that came the cloud. So the cloud really was a big pivot for how we built software for customers. Before this time, software was typically built in 3-year release cycles, sometimes 5-year release cycles. So we would design the next release as soon as we launched one, and then it would take a year or so to build it, another year or two to test it. Meanwhile, if you were building software, customers couldn't wait that long, that 3-year cycle. So they were making customizations. And they, in turn, if they made those customizations, they wouldn't take necessarily your first release, that first upgrade. So by the time most of the customer base took an upgrade from software, it was probably on the drawing board anywhere from 4 to 5 years before. The cloud completely changed that. Now we can ship software monthly, if not daily. The customers can control when to update it. You're able to standardize your offering. You moved away from customizations to configurations. And again, it completely disrupted lots of companies that were already in that decade in the previous business model. New entrants are able to come in and quickly take market share. And then going forward, these are just some of the technologies that are emerging, but there's many more that are coming. Internet of Things. So just new sensors, new types of data. A lot of folks still are not getting their arms around just a steady stream of new information, tracking where people are, cameras, and video, which takes up a lot of bandwidth, very difficult to process. We now needed machine intelligence to basically manage all of this information. Humans couldn't analyze it or deal with it. So machines needed to take in this new information from all these sensors coming in and increasing automation. And blockchain also coming into play. It hit its kind of hype cycle about 5 years ago, but will probably take off again in a few years. Machine intelligence, we had a little bit of a hype cycle about 4 or 5 years ago, really took off with ChatGPT. So again, lots of waves of technology coming in that each one of them has their own, what we call patterns, how to build for them, anti-patterns, things not to do. And you'll see when we teach technology concepts, a lot of the anti-patterns apply no matter what decade you're in. They're things that will cause you problems. CTOs, CPOs, heads of product really need to understand how each platform impacts their market, their customer base, and ultimately their business model. So we don't want to see folks anchored in the wrong decade. So we'd like to get a quick pause of the room. We're going to do a poll right now to get a sense of for the audience. Which decade were you in? When did you enter the workforce? And let's give the audience about a minute or so to enter in. All right, we're spanning about 3 decades here. We actually have some real young folks entering the workforce here. Very good.
This makes me feel old, Philip.
Uh-oh, so we got some 80s in there. I won't ask who that is, but I suspect I know some of us. I suspect you're one of those.
What if the decades don't go back far enough?
That's a good question. That's we're dealing with some either you were very young, you violated some child labor laws, or some of the folks may need to be retired at that point. So we're just going to focus on that middle part of the curve there. So very good. Just if anybody is willing to volunteer from the 80s, what was the first technology they worked on? Doug, you want to weigh in?
I do. In fact, we were talking about it this morning. The first computer I had was a VIC-20, probably 1978. Officially entered the workforce in the 80s, but I worked for my dad when I was 7, so I think that counts too. That was in the 70s.
Very good. Does anyone from the 2010s want to just volunteer what platform they worked on? What kind of technology did they work on? And you can put it in the chat if you want to, if you don't want to speak up. You're welcome to enter something in the chat.
One of the first things I helped build was REST APIs, and they were all new and exciting then.
Good. Very good. Anyone from the 2020s? What's the first thing you worked on? All right, that's all right if no one wants to add on. So again, a lot of technologies, a lot of different ways to keep track of for all of you. And let's see, I don't know if everybody saw the results yet. All right, we can stop sharing that for just a second here. But it's a bit overwhelming for people that are not familiar with technology to understand these. So we're going to simplify some of these ways of technology and how it applies to product management. So the first one, really the first decade or so, or 2 decades, what we call systems of record. And the systems of record were really employee facing. And because they were employee facing, you didn't really have to worry about users following a process. And so it was really focused on automation, leaning out processes, becoming more efficient, and using technology as a tool. As we moved into the 90s and the 2000s and the 2010s, we shifted more towards system engagement. How can we increase our customer base? How can we improve the relationship with our customers throughout the customer journey? So concepts like journey mapping didn't really come into play in the digital world really until the 90s or 2000s, because you're worried about, where am I losing customers along the way? They may opt out, and we really need to make a frictionless experience from awareness to of looking at your product or service, to researching competitors, to onboarding, to using your product or service, to customer support. Anywhere along the way, you could lose those customers. And so this is where journey mapping came into play, jobs to be done theory came into play. Even personas themselves were really more of a focus than they were in systems of record. We're really more focused on automation. And then moving into the newer decade, I'm calling the systems of awareness, but we may move this more towards just machine automation and just continual processing. And we're using the term systems of awareness because there's more and more inputs of data coming in where it's real time, and you need to look at the time perspective and also the structure of the data that you're managing and working with. So you can kind of cluster them in these 3 groups because it simplifies the number of patterns that you need to learn and to use with your teams. Now, as product managers and as technologists, we're always very focused on what we call systems of protection. And it was easier with systems of record. You didn't have to worry about outsiders getting access to your systems. And as soon as we opened up towards more customer-facing systems, there were more attack vectors and ways that people could steal your company's data or your customers' data. And then lastly, systems of awareness, more and more entry points potentially for accessing your networks and your data, or your customers' data and their network. So security becomes more and more important as we've added our waves of technology. So one way to think of this is, over time, we've gone from more manual activities to more automated, and we're on a spectrum. I want to show you a framework for how we think about this from a technology perspective, as we're improving and increasing all of our augmentation of any process, any relationship that we have, anything that we're doing in our daily lives. So looking at from a manual perspective to an automated, think of the right tools for the job, but also the right customer experience. And as we typically move more to the right, we're not always moving to the right in all aspects of it with each of these waves of technology. So to give you just a simple version of this, the tools for the job, think of a job of a task or a whole, and we'll also do one for paying a service or a toll. And the idea here isn't, again, to be moving all the way to the right, but understand where you are in your market and where do you need to be going forward, though. So if we use this example, the right tool for the job, think of, I want to dig a hole. The simplest thing you can do is use your hand, right? Not very efficient or very effective. Not many things you can really dig a hole in unless it's dirt. You might need a shovel. That's dramatically increased your power and capability. If you need something bigger, then we're actually dealing with machines. So something like an excavator, all the way to the far right spectrum of something fully automated. You may have seen that's automatically digging a hole and, say, planting a seed. Notice, though, that it's very special purpose. The more that we move more and more to the right, you may be more focused on what the tools are that you've automated. And as you move further and further back to the left, there's more flexibility. And so, again, keep in mind where you are on the spectrum, particularly if you're designing tools for your customers. Where do they need to be on that spectrum? Because throughout the customer journey, throughout the job itself, people are going to move typically to the right, but sometimes back to the left. From a customer perspective, if we say we're taking a toll, and if you're a toll provider for a road, we first started was we would have gates, we'd have people that would take your money, they would let you through. Then we moved more towards automated. We took the human out, and you would have some lanes that you just threw change in the bucket. And many of us had to carry change in our cars, depending on what cities and what locations we're in. Then we started moving towards multimodal. So you would have a person that would pay with cash or coin. You might have an automated slot just for coins, or if you paid for a sensor to be put in your car, you could go right through. Where now in a lot of markets, it's completely sensor free. You drive through, it takes a picture of your license plate, and you get a bill later in the month. So again, all along those spectrums, you could be anywhere there along those spectrums. So, the workforce typically needs more powerful tools to do their job, but also customers, are looking for more and more automation. But you're not always needing to move further and further to the right. Sometimes, again, you need to go back to the left, and it changes with each wave of technology because there's disruption with each of those waves of technology. And so keep in mind where you are in your market from an internal tools perspective, but also from a customer perspective. If you're anchored in the wrong decade and you're not really focused, you get really caught blindside with what's going on in the market. So, no one really thinks in your current job or at your current company that you're a Blockbuster in a Netflix world. Your CDs or DVDs were shipped by mail, and now they're completely streamed. Blockbuster went out of business in just a very short amount of time. Cars and so taxis have really dramatically decreased due to Uber in most markets, and rental cars have also changed significantly. I think rental cars have had a bit of a resurgence in some markets, but think of all those poor airports that build those rental car facilities 30 minutes away, and that big investment happened right before Uber took off. So you start to see big waves influencing big investments. Hotels have changed dramatically with Airbnb. I think this market has swung back a bit more towards hotels. If anyone's doing Airbnb or Vrbo, people aren't really liking those cleaning fees of $100, $150. And so you start to see hotels picking it back up. They've responded in turn. And just the news world, whether it's newspapers or satellite TV, Twitter has completely changed that business model. Even going back to some of us worked at eBay, that completely wiped out the classified markets for most of those businesses. So a lot of those changes. And and I'm still going to call it Twitter. Some of you are supposed to call it X, so I'm going to still call it Twitter for a while. So feel free to call it whatever you wish. So the reason this happens, though, is that technology changes exponentially, but organizations and people change much slower. And your goal as a product manager or as a technologist is to really close that gap within your company. So you have to know the market trends that are going on, how to master those technologies. Ultimately, you also have to know how organizational dynamics, how do you influence your peers within your organization. So, all right. Let's shift gears a bit towards paths to product management. And we'll ask you some questions here, but product management is a very unique role, particularly in the digital space. And there's a lot of differences of opinions of what does a product manager mean? But we're just going to focus on career paths to how you get to product management. One possible career path is your subject matter expert, and somehow you get pulled into sales, or you may have started in sales, and then you may have moved into technical sales, and you got so good at that, someone decided, hey, you should be a product manager. So that could be the path to product manager for some of you. Others may have had a business undergrad degree and either became an operational leader within their business or within a software or services company, and they may have been promoted to a product manager. Others may have taken the MBA path and then went straight to product manager, didn't really know the business that well, but had to become a product manager. So those are the non-technical paths. Two semi-technical paths, or more technical. One might be an MIS undergrad. For those of you that are not in the United States, this is more what we call management of information services. It doesn't have all of the programming background that you would have in a computer science degree. So that path could go to a business analyst, and a business analyst may become a product manager. Some MIS undergrads become developers, and that path is a common path of a business analyst to a product manager. And lastly, computer science or some engineering undergrad, you become a developer, may become a senior developer, and then go into product management. So from there, product managers have a career path to chief product officers. And so there's different paths. And if you didn't take that branch, a salesperson may become a sales manager. They may become a VP of sales. A senior developer may become a director of engineering, may become an architect, and they may become a CTO or VP of technology. And the product manager, typically their path is to go from individual product manager to VP of product. So again, all very different paths. All three of those roles are potentially influencing the CEO. And any of those could be candidates to become a CEO. But you as a product manager, your sphere of influence may just be within this role. But these are a lot of different folks you deal with. So as a product manager, we not only have to know a little bit about technology, or potentially a lot, we may also need to know a lot about sales techniques, customer support. So it's not an easy role as a product manager, particularly if you don't have a background on these other career paths. So just curious for most of you, let us know your background. How did you get to product manager? Oh, this is good. No former salespeople here. That actually may not be good. They probably need this the most. All right, let's end this poll, Doug. Very good. Very understandable. Well, we hope for many of you to expose you to some of these concepts. And we're going to just, at a high level, walk through some of the technology concepts. And then we'll also walk you through some of the additional topics we cover at our course in February of next year. So one of the things we'll cover in our course is the difference of a product owner versus a product manager. And in our view, product owner is typically a role within Scrum, but the product manager is a real full-time job. You're constantly influencing sales, you're influencing the technology officer, you're looking at the market, but it is a big role. And what we'll focus on for the rest of this course is just a little bit of the technology aspects that you'll be learning. So one of the things we'll cover just at a high level, and this is very basic stuff, websites and web pages. So typical website, at your top level site, your company.com has a top level domain, and you're going to typically have, if you go out and create website yourself, if you provision a free service from any WordPress site or any company that provides them, you'll typically get a blank template like this. And about us, you may have a catalog or listing of what you provide, and you may in turn have a list of products or services that you provide. You might need a search. You should have a search in your website, and then contact us if for some reason you can't self-serve with whatever you have on your website. And then ultimately everything to self-serve, which is to transact on your website, to interact with you anywhere along that customer journey. So these are different types of aspects of your site, typically due to different parts of the customer journey. And we'll walk you through how these are actually different technologies in some cases underneath this. The website itself is served up by web pages, and the web pages typically have a few common aspects. There's a header, and there'll typically be a left sidebar. There'll typically be a footer, and then you have your main content in the middle, and sometimes there's a right sidebar. So no matter what website you see, this is the common layout. The areas in gray are mostly static. The areas in the middle are more dynamic. So how do we build that? And the way that we build that are some basic building blocks. At the very basic level of a web page is HTML. This is the language or structure of documents that you see on the web. And many of you may know HTML, but it's fairly readable. It looks a lot like English, but it does nothing to do about how your site looks. It's hard to kind of make your site look good. That's where cascading style sheets come in. So think of styles that you would see in Word or Excel or PowerPoint, where you just want to change the layout of your entire PowerPoint document. Very similar concepts here of how you change the look and feel of your site so that the fonts are consistent, the colors are consistent. You don't have to consistently write that in every HTML on every single page. So it makes it easier to keep your site up to date. And then JavaScript is what takes a static website or web page and makes it more dynamic or interactive. This is what makes it more like an actual application, such as Microsoft Word or Outlook or Excel. And it limits the ability to needing to refresh the page every time you want to query more information or submit information. So if you want to submit information, or if you have images on the site, we'll talk about submitting in just a bit here, but you have images on your website, and you may have photos, which are bitmaps or JPEGs, or you might have scalable vector graphics, which you don't have to resize. You don't have to worry about how big or small the screen is. If you worry about how big the screen is, that's where responsive design has come in. So it automatically dynamically adjusts the web page to various different form factors. Before that, we had to have detect what kind of browser you had, and to know if you're on a desktop or if you're on a mobile app, and then manage actually two different websites. And responsive design makes it easier to manage a single website. And forms is for capturing data and information from the end user. So you'll, if you want to interact with the user and capture that information, that's where you have a form, and you may need more advanced form technologies if you want to be able to have them avoiding re-entering the information that they've entered before. It has to have some sense of how that particular user has used that application. All of these together can get you up to what are called progressive web apps, and which this takes what used to be a very static web page to make it more like an application that behaves like an application you install on your desktop, and it looks just like an application. So it doesn't really feel as much like a website as it does a very rich user interface. So these are some of the basic building blocks that you and your team are probably using to build your product or service for your company. Now let's look at a typical e-commerce company, what that looks like. So we talked about where you are in the journey, and if we just talk about high-level prospects versus customers, prospects are people that are not yet customers. Customers are people that have bought from you or consume your services, and you want to keep them as customers. Prospects may not hit your website. You may reach out to them by email. They may reach out to you. They may hear about you through social networks, and these could be public ones. These could be private ones. This could be a service such as Gartner if you're in the business-to-business world, but it's some other third-party information or website that has information about you. Tools that might help you there are automated campaign tools. We didn't talk about that before. We talked about websites, but this is yet another kind of technology that is used to manage campaigns to reach out to customers or prospects. all of these together may have different technologies. So you'll typically see a web content management system. This manages the static content. Usually it's content from your marketing department, but it's stuff that you're not going to change very frequently. This could be accessed from a website, a traditional one. It could be a responsive website. You may have some plugins. But the other component you'll have is the web content manager is a search. If people don't want to browse your site, you typically have a search engine behind the scenes, and that's constantly looking for updates to your content on your site. But people are typically looking for product details. This is typically your product catalog. You may have a completely separate system that manages the content for your website. You may have an internal system that's looking for, let's say you have lots of suppliers. You need to get their information. You need to enrich their information and take better photos, write better descriptions, and again, tailor it for your market. Those are product information management systems, and those may or may not fit within your current website that you have today or e-commerce platform. Some customers need product fitment. So this is yet another more complicated solution. The more expensive your solution is, or more dynamic, this may be a special purpose application just built for your particular market to determine, does your product fit your customer's needs? Anywhere along the way, your customer may have some frustration, wants to talk to someone. This is where chat comes in. It could be a chat bot, could be a human, but what you're doing is yet another technology. It's typically a plugin to help streamline that experience. And then ideally, you've got your customers, they've got products, they put it into a cart, a shopping cart, they may bundle more things. Then you've got payments. You may need to provide initial payment options. And then over time, you may have just a portal where people can come back and see what they want. These may be a single platform at the bottom, rare, but for most companies, you have multiple platforms, multiple teams needing to support all this. So this is a typical e-commerce architecture. Some of you are in a B2B space, but there's still similar aspects that are necessary for your product or service, which is you've got email, you've got campaigns to acquire customers. You probably have a website just to get customers to come on board. Then this could be your product or service. It could be a website. It could be a mobile app. It could be a multitude of those. You may even provide APIs to your customers throughout the service, and your portal may be your primary product or service offering. But you start to see where different platforms have different needs for different aspects of your market. One thing you may see in the e-commerce world is something called headless or composable commerce, where because it was difficult to maintain all of the different user interfaces, how the website looked, how it looked consistent. If you wanted to do a branding upgrade, for example, you had to go make changes in 1, 2, 3, 4, sometimes 5 different systems if you just wanted to do a simple rebranding. Or if you made a change somewhere in one place, you wanted to make it consistent in other ones. It required lots of teams to make changes that could have been just cosmetic at the surface. So one trend that you're starting to see in the e-commerce world is composable commerce, what used to be called headless. The idea there is you've got a very nice responsive website that in turn is making API calls via JavaScript back to these backends. Now, I just mentioned a lot of terms that we won't cover today, but just that's how these things behave and operate, and we'll go into more details on that in the full course. All right, so one term you may hear is front end or back end. And the front end is typically anything the end user sees, and the back end is anything that provides that. So just at a high level, we're going to show you a model that's used to be called client server or 3-tier. The front end is your laptop or smartphone. And as a product owner, you may not have thought of all these aspects of what actually is on the device itself. But, the client laptop or phone typically will have input devices, speakers, microphones, Bluetooth, cameras, USB, its own display. And it's got these other aspects here, the network interface, which is how it connects to the network. It's got its own memory. It runs its own operating system, and it's got active memory and what's stored to disk. And the browser is typically what you're interacting with. And as a product manager, you do need to be aware of these different aspects because these are additional inputs, and how similar or diverse these are across your customer base is important to know. But this is typically the front end, which is typically an end user. Again, it may not be an end user, it may be another machine. The back end is every service that you provide. And there's typically at least two aspects: a web server, which may not have all these speakers and microphones, but it's got other things that need it to run. And it's typically calling a database. Okay. And this is typically what we call the back end. All of this traverses a network. The back end could be in your data center. For newer customers, it's typically in a cloud provider such as Microsoft Azure, Amazon Web Services, or Google Cloud Platform. So this has become easier and easier to manage, and it's helpful because this is also proliferating on both sides. So again, the front end is typically how the user interacts, and the back end is how those components serve all that information back to the customer. Now, throughout the customer journey, there's lots of different back-end systems here throughout the customer journey. Your front end, your client may just be operating with one single laptop or smartphone. They may have multiple ones. And so this is where the art and science comes in of how to manage these different environments. So this is just a high-level intro to some of these topics here. So question 3 for the audience, just your familiarity with some of these topics here, just whether the underlying technology for websites, web pages, just want a sense of those of you that are dialed in. How familiar are you with these concepts? Not technical to 5, you're very technical. Good, a good skew. I think I know who. I've got a few very technical folks on here. All right, let's go ahead and end the poll there, Doug, and show the results. All right, very good. So let's talk about ways that you can learn more for those of you that aren't a 5, or those of you that are potentially at 4 below. So there's actually some free stuff out there. One of the free things is from Google. They have something called web.dev, and they have some nice modules that you can self-pay, self-study. And they are clear from their website. They want to help you build a beautiful website. They want to make it fast and secure. And they don't just do this from the goodness of their own heart. They actually want you and every one of their customers to build fast websites, because it takes them a lot of money and a lot of time to crawl your websites. And if they're a bad website, you actually will get penalized as a company. You will not show up high in their search results. And so it's in your best interest to have a fast, responsive website. Not only will Google crawl it fast, it'll put you higher in the search results. You'll also have much higher customer retention and customer loyalty with a fast website. So they start with the basics, privacy and accessibility, but a lot of the concepts I introduced, the front end concepts, they walk through all those all the way up to progressive web apps. And so again, this is a free class that you can learn self-study if you just want to understand some of the fundamentals. If you'd like a more advanced class, our class that we're teaching is 2 full days in February, not 2 full days, 2 half days, I'm sorry. And what we'll cover are just some core developer concepts. So we talked about the technology waves already, but we'll go into more details on the front and the back end, how those aspects work together. We'll go into different kinds of databases for different needs. What are SQL databases, structured query language, versus NoSQL databases, and why they're needed through different parts of the customer journey, or in your case, if you're a B2B, why you would have a NoSQL database, how these systems talk to one another, and also just understanding cloud hosting concepts. For those of you that are dealing with an older technology, you're moving from on-premise or your data center to the cloud, you'll understand some of the challenges your engineering teams and colleagues are going through as they move to the cloud. We're also going to introduce you to some high-level architectural concepts that your engineers are very concerned about, and your CTO is concerned about. Availability, which is minimizing downtime, and scalability, which is how fast can you respond in order to do it and not spend a ton of money. So those are 2 things we'll introduce at a very high level. We'll also explain to you some architectural principles that are very non-technical, but they make sense in not only in the digital world, but anywhere you've got any kind of engineering needs. But principles help each team make decisions on their own and not have to go back to a central architect. We'll also touch on technical debt and why you as product managers are responsible for paying it down, and you may not understand where does it come from. So we'll explain how does technical debt accumulate, and how does it emerge, and how do you help pay it down. And then also just touch on some different roles with engineering and how different skill sets help you deliver your product. So that will be most of the first session. In the second session, we'll go through just some key processes that engineering teams work on, from a project to a product to a program to a service. These are different kinds of work, and there's different disciplines to master those. And we'll go into a little more details of product owner versus product manager, and really focused on product owner and Scrum. And then what are some of the KPIs in Agile to know if your team is really doing Agile properly. And then we'll go into team size construction just briefly, but we're really focused on small, durable, autonomous teams that help you innovate. And then lastly, we'll introduce big data and machine learning. The focus here is how do you aggregate lots of data for either your customers, your executives, your internal teams, and then ultimately we'll also introduce you to AI and ML. But the goal is to have the proper mix of humans and machines to win in the market. So the folks that will be teaching that course, I'll introduce in just a second. That course is $1,000. For those of you that are in the webinar, it's $800. I'll be one of the instructors. David Blatherwick, who's not on the call right now, will be another instructor. And John Jackson, he's our machine learning and AI expert. So he'll have a webinar fairly soon. I would encourage you to attend, but we'll be the instructors for the class. And we'll send you this after the class. There's a promo code, and for those, and you can forward this on to some of your friends if you need to. And it does not have an expiration, but we'd love to have some of you sign up. So we're done a bit early. Does the audience have any questions? All right. Well, thank you for taking this time out of your Friday. We appreciate you taking an hour out of your day, and we'll send you follow-up information. If you have any questions, you can email me directly. I'll even give you my availability schedule if you want to reach out to me if you have any questions about the class. So again, thank you so much for your time, and have a good weekend.